Do you notice something? I'll be honest, I didn't really see it for ages, but once you spot it, it's kind of impossible to ignore. Where on earth are all the women? For centuries, women artists were left out, pushed aside, or just flat out erased from art history. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's just how the game was played. Take the Prado Museum in Madrid, for example. In its permanent collection, out of nearly 1,700 works on display, only 9 are by women. That's 0.5%. So basically, tons of women on the walls, but almost no women being the artists behind them. But some of their stories, they're too good to miss. So let me take you with me into the lives of Artemisia Gentileschi, Clara Peeters, and Berthe Morisot. Because trust me, those aren't your average art stories. Artemisia Gentileschi was born in Rome in 1593, right in the thick of the Baroque era. Her dad was a painter, so she basically grew up in his studio with a brush in her hand. For women at that time, the doors of art academies or painters' guilds were pretty much welded shut. No women beyond this point, you can imagine, embroidered in gold thread on a velvet robe. But Artemisia wasn't about to stay in the background. She learned from her dad and soon enough painted powerful, dramatic, almost cinematic scenes. Women who actually do things, not just look pretty and faint on a couch. Her Judith slaying Holofernes isn't just a biblical story. It's a moment of absolute female power. But then Artemisia's story also takes a turn that's very hard to talk about. As a young woman, Artemisia was raped by another painter. Her father actually took the case to court, which was unheard of at the time. Artemisia had to go through a brutal public trial, even torture, to prove she was telling the truth. Honestly, anyone would have understood if she just disappeared after that. But Artemisia did the exact opposite. She threw herself into her work, and against all the odds, she actually became famous in her own lifetime. In fact, Artemisia became the first woman ever admitted to the prestigious Accademia di Arti del Disegno in Florence, a huge deal back then. She was one of the very few women who managed to get paid, get respect, and even have a little artistic beef with her male colleagues, which is not too shabby for someone who technically isn't even supposed to be in the room. But of course, there has to be a plot twist. After her death, her story gets buried. A bunch of her paintings get credited to her dad or other man. It took centuries and a new wave of feminist art historians in the 1970s to finally bring Artemisia's name back into the light. Now here's something art historians today love to argue about. For a long time, Artemisia was basically held up as the symbol of female rage and revenge. Was she painting out her own trauma? Was Judas slaying Holofernes a kind of personal battle cry? Maybe, but it's not that simple. There's no hard proof that she put her own story directly into her work. Some researchers today even warn against reducing her to a victim or the woman who painted her pain. Artemisia was, above all, a seriously skilled and independent artist who managed to succeed in a world where the odds were stacked against her. And that's impressive, no matter what was going on behind the scenes. What's interesting is how contemporary her work still feels, even after all those centuries. Artemisia's women don't just sit pretty. They rage, they fight, they survive. And when you stand in front of her paintings, you can feel that energy, even across 400 years. For our second female artist, let's step into the Dutch Golden Age and its still lives. Silver goblets, stacks of cheese, tiny bouquets, little shiny fish, you get the gist. Clara Peeters was painting in Antwerp in the early 1600s, right when still lifes were exploding in popularity. But back then, painting food and tableware was seen as lesser than painting grand heroic men or religious scenes. And guess who got pushed into those smaller genres? Exactly. As a woman, it was also much harder for Clara to get into the Painters Guild, which again made it much harder to officially sign or sell her work. But in true rebellious fashion, did she care about that? Absolutely not. Clara not only signed her work, sometimes confidently open, sometimes sneakily on the knife blade or in a reflection, she even snuck her own face into the metal of a goblet or a lid and was thereby painting tiny self-portraits hidden in plain sight. You think hiding Easter eggs in Marvel movies is clever? Clara was doing it with butter knives centuries ago. But also for centuries, art historians just ignored her. A lot of her paintings were labeled anonymous or misattributed to male painters. It wasn't until the late 20th century that scholars started really tracking down her work and giving Clara Peeters her credit. What I love about Clara's paintings is how quietly confident they are. She turned what was considered women's art into something extraordinary. Rich, incredibly detailed, meticulous in technique, and a little bit playful if you know where to look. Clara Peeters used the possibilities of still life painting to carve out her own space and make a statement about her skills, even when society tried to keep her in the background. Next up, Berthe Morisot, the Impressionist you probably should have heard about, but almost never do. Picture Paris in the late 1800s. Impressionism is the new cool kid on the block. Monet, Manet, Renoir, Degas, and almost always left off the list, Berthe Morisot. She was one of the founding members of the Impressionist exhibitions, literally in the room where it happened, and helped to invent the whole style. Back then, her work was actually shown alongside the big names. She even married Edouard Manet's brother, so yeah, she was Impressionist royalty. Still, her reputation lagged behind. Because she was a woman, Berthe was often seen as a supporting act, as if she was just tagging along with her famous friends. Many critics back then dismissed her work as feminine, as if that was an insult, or treated it like a side note to the great achievements of the men around her. What Berthe did instead was quietly revolutionary. She painted women from the inside out with real complexity and feeling. Her own sisters, her daughter, her friends, always with this shimmering light and almost dreamlike brushwork. Her paintings are so full of movement, atmosphere, and life that you almost feel like you could step right into them. For decades after her death, critics and historians almost overlooked her, as if she was a minor character in someone else's story. Only in recent years have art historians and museums started to really rediscover her brilliance and put her back into the spotlight. So if you want to see what Impressionism really looks like when it's at its most daring and most intimate, start with Berthe Morisot. For many decades and sometimes even centuries, Morisot and so many other women like her were left out of the story, quietly sidelined while the same old names took center stage. But then something started to change. It took a while, and a lot of feminist art historians in the 1970s who just refused to believe that women had never created anything great to start a hidden women artist movement. I imagine the curators with flashlights and Indiana Jones hats searching the basement for another female signature. Fast forward to now, and suddenly the world's biggest museums are catching up. The National Gallery in London gave Artemisia Gentileschi her own blockbuster solo exhibition. The Musée d'Orsay in Paris is now spotlighting Impressionist women like Berthe Morisot. And in New York, Hilma af Klint's, I talk about her in another video, Guggenheim retrospective became a surprise visitor hit. People were lining up around the block for an artist barely anyone had heard of 10 years ago. When you bring women's story back, the whole picture shifts. New heroes, new ways of seeing, new questions to ask, and way more reasons to get excited about walking into the next museum. This is what rewriting history actually looks like, and the best part is that it's just getting started. And it's not just women who've been systematically left out of art history, and the art market for that matter. Black artists, indigenous artists, queer creators, so many marginalized groups were deliberately excluded from the story for centuries. But right now, those walls are finally starting to crack open. A lot of these stories are being uncovered too, and it's changing what we see in museums, what we talk about, and who gets to belong in art history. So if you want to see more stories that will rewrite art history, hit subscribe. And if you have a special topic we should cover in the next video, let me know in the comments. See you next time.